I'll say this, Cameron, and let me know if this monologue's too long. But essentially, I'm an ER doc. I wrote a book on a diet called the Athos diet, which I would claim is Christian fasting done right. And ironically, my three-pronged approach is intermittent fasting, plant-based protein or plant-based food in general, and walking. Simple. And the way that I sort of arrive at these pillars is, of course, through research of science and medicine. I'm a doctor who's in an ER, and I care about that stuff. But the way it even got onto my radar is because I'm a Greek Orthodox Christian. And essentially what we like to say is that we were one of a few historic churches that can trace literally their bishop's genealogy back to Jesus to say, if Jesus told person A something, that next person tells person B all the way down to Z, and eventually that's a bishop that I see today. Okay, so there's literally a spiritual genealogy. And if you ever get to meet my father someday, he's an eye surgeon. He's also a Greek Orthodox monk. He looks like Gandalf. And he looks so ridiculous because to some extent you can argue this faith does everything it can to maintain the teachings and the practices of the original ancient fathers all the way going back to Jesus. And what's interesting about that is the fasting practice should include intermittent fasting and a plant-based diet. And so if you even go back to something, and I thought this was maybe, evidence for your argument, but if you go back to the canons of the church, and again, we're talking about a religion of 300 million people today that have been all over the world, that ruled the Byzantine Empire, that the New Testament was written in Greek, all these different things. I know you've discussed that. But even the canons of our church forbid clergy from even hunting, let alone eating. So I mean, these are maybe supplements of information. I don't know if you've researched this. We call it the prologue. It's essentially this list of, it's a gigantic text. It's over 1,000 pages, but it's literally been built over 2,000 years. And so you open up this big ass book and you look towards Canon 55, and it says, hey, monks should not be hunting, priests should not be hunting, deacons should not be hunting. What's that all about? Well, I can tell you right now, monks even today, are not supposed to hunt, and clergy today are not supposed to hunt whatsoever. Now, to be objective and be fair, personally, sometimes facts, we can all agree on facts. Sometimes we don't necessarily agree on interpretation, and then there's another level, which is like, what the hell do we do with the interpretation? So I'm not necessarily advocating for, saving every animal's life from my perspective. But what I can tell you is that in the spirit of monks trying to mimic what the apostles did and what Jesus told them, it's a very interesting perspective to say that when it comes to monks in particular, who literally are, they say Christ is alike to angels, angels are alike to monastics, and monastics are alike to the people, that there would be this commandment that says, don't murder animals. So with that said, I'm essentially promoting a diet as Orthodox Christians and as Christians in general fast throughout the year. We do a lot of that. I've been fasting since I was 7, 200 days a year. I'm a vegan. But essentially, I thought there was some interesting overlap between what you're sort of arguing for and sort of the breadcrumbs let's say, since 0 AD that led me believe that one of the most historic churches in the world and one of the most historic communities in the world, which is in Mount Athos, that's a group of 23 churches or 23 monasteries out in Greece, that even to this day, no one's killing any animals. So anyway, I just wanted to put that out there and see if there was anything that resonated as I introduced that, opener.
Absolutely. Well, firstly, I have studied this, for 15 years from every single angle, and I've definitely come across Orthodoxy a number of times with different sourcing, and obviously the church fathers. I've been in the church fathers like crazy for the last 5 to 8 years. But what really got me interested in it more so was that I started dating, and now we're together and have a kid and everything, a Coptic Orthodox Christian. She's Egyptian, and so that's like Oriental Orthodox, which is like
absolutely
Ethiopic, Coptic, and I feel like there's one more in there, but
Might be Assyrian or Armenian. Yeah.
Yeah, one of those. And it's the same with them, where they're technically, you know, if you're really following the faith the way that you're called to, you're fasting like, I think it's like 247 days a year vegan. And so, and you know, that it's believed that the Coptic Church traces its lineage back to, I think, Mark, Saint Mark. And so I'm with you on that, where it's like, okay, the more you go back in time and get more and more original to those who are the most connected to the original way, let's call it, you start to see that. You see more and more of an emphasis on this, even if it's just for asceticism purposes or whatever, this emphasis on eliminating animal foods for at least extended periods. And that's how I got into this in general, because I come from a Protestant background. I was raised in the American South as a Baptist.
You used to sell barbecue food, man. I know all about you.
Oh, yeah. So
I've watched so many of your videos, but yes, I'm familiar. Keep going.
Yeah, so it was a fast, the Daniel fast, which is kind of like the only fasting tradition that I would say is in any kind of Protestantism or American Protestantism. It almost became like a Lent in a way, not for everyone, but for just those willing to do it, you know, and it got pretty popular and almost like fad diet level. You'll see, I know you haven't seen the film yet, but the film, we talk about this particular angle in my entrance to a lot of these questions through that. And you'll see that, what's his name? The guy that played, he's the main character from Jurassic Park, and like the Marvel series and all of that. He's a really famous actor. Anyways,
you got the Jewish guy?
No,
he's a mathematician in Jurassic Park that he was eventually in Marvel as like an ornery character, but I don't know who else would be from the Jurassic Park that's in Marvel.
He's the main guy from the new Jurassic Parks. He's like the
the new one, Chris Pratt.
Chris Pratt, yeah.
Yeah.
So Chris Pratt did a Daniel fast and talked about it online, and he got on all the major, you know, news networks talking about it years ago and everything. It's that popular. And then when I was a kid, there was Rick Warren's Daniel plan, which is the guy who wrote A Purpose-Driven Life. He's at the time, it's that book, Purpose-Driven Life, was selling more books than the Bible. Like it was like the top Christian book. He was in Oprah's book club, yada, yada, yada. Anyways, he wrote a book and made a whole church program called the Daniel Plan, which was about fasting, but through more of, like I said, like a Protestant or just kind of non-denominational lens. But yeah, it was fasting that got me into this, really. I committed to it. I was a full-on meat eater, but I committed to it because I wanted to draw closer to God, and I was taking my faith really serious, and I was getting into writing gospel music and had these dreams of, you know, making gospel records and being in a gospel band and that sort of thing. And the process of fasting just completely turned my world upside down. The way that I felt physically, mentally, but especially spiritually. And then also the way that during those periods, my mind and my heart would just unlock things about the scripture in a different way and just see things that I'd never seen before. And that's where a lot of the questions came in. So I'm all about the fasting element, and, you know, was always fascinated by Jesus fasting 40 days in the wilderness and everything. So all that to say, I mean, there's so many avenues that we could go down in talking about this particular question. And I love that you're, you know, doing this from a place of faith. That's really interesting. I'm really interested in Mount Athos too, by the way. I'm just kind of throwing all the things out there. Because one of the key pieces of evidence that I'm actually seeking out and working on for another film now after Christspiracy is there's a manuscript that we're looking for, that there's evidence of, that's a more original Hand of Moses document that's kind of like Deuteronomy, but even older. And there's in the 1800s a tradition or a story of a guy who found this, and then he was deemed to be a forager. But it turns out modern science is proving that that was probably not true and that it probably was a real document. So we're trying to find it. Bottom line, there's another, that's the Old Testament. There's all of this mention throughout the patristics, all the early church fathers, of this Hebrew gospel of Matthew and how it has differentiation from our Greek gospels in a number of ways. But one of the primary ways is this kind of rejection of animal sacrifice and flesh consumption is in that gospel, recorded by Epiphanius and Eusebius and some of the church fathers. And it's just been completely lost to history. Many people have written about it because the church fathers wrote about it, but no one's ever seen in a modern time a copy of that document. But I just so happened to Google, and I think it was Google, ChatGPT, a number of different things. Mount Athos kept coming up as a possibility of maybe it's in one of the libraries there. St. Catherine's Monastery, I think in Sinai. I don't know. Does Athos, do they actually have any old text and anything there, or a library that you've seen?
So I've been to all of those places, and this is the interesting part. It's like, just like if you were to ask people about the American Revolution, it would probably make sense to go to America and talk to people who are English and talk to people who have English sounding last names to get a more accurate sense of history. It would be very logical to reach out to, people of that part of the world that,
right,
created these documents, that spoke that language, that handed it down, that lived and breathed in these areas. Now, Mount Athos itself, I believe it can trace its history back at least 1,200 years. It certainly has been occupied for a very long time, and the practice of asceticism in that peninsula probably predates when it was sort of officially recognized as such. But it, sort of as a community of 23 monasteries of every ethnic Orthodox group in the world. Even Hitler respected Mount Athos. He understood there were things, because he was obsessed with magic and looking for various, spiritual devices. And he was very interested in the area of Mount Athos for the same reasons you are, actually, which is that it's an incredible time capsule for everything. When I was there as a teenager, it has one of the biggest pieces of the biggest piece of the cross of Christ, ever maintained. And this is the stuff that they're claiming. It's, we could all go back and do science experiments to prove whatever we want to. And I'm a man of faith who really does believe that when you go to a place like this that literally looks like something out of Lord of the Rings, Narnia, if a freaking dragon flew out of a cave, I'd say like that's, of course, that's par for that's just normal there. It just really looks like that type of place. They're castles, but the monks themselves, they are so disconnected from the world. And the way I arrive at Mount Athos is not just because I'm Greek Orthodox, but when you look at neurodegenerative disease, Parkinson's, Huntington's disease, dementia, Alzheimer's, they don't have it. Yeah. They don't have them. And they live well into their 90s in very good health. Right. In fact, you can go to a funeral there. I remember once they were saying, oh, this man died. He was very young. He was like in his 80s. It just gives you a sense of the longevity factor. And so that's where I come in as a doc and say, hey, what's going on here? And when I sort of piece back the story as to what brings them longevity, good health, etc., it's these traditions that have been kept for a very, very long time. And they've been outliving people for centuries, no matter what the trend is of the time. So when you speak about documents and icons or relics or however different categories you want to describe, if there's any place in the world that could maintain ancient scripts, documents of all sorts and sizes, that's the place where they would be hidden. Now, I will say, you need a visa to get there. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site. You need a visa to get there. I think there's maybe 200,000 to 300,000 people a year that go there on pilgrimage, and for various reasons. I know 60 Minutes went there many years ago and had special permissions to do documentaries. Certainly people can videotape anything they want. But in terms of the mechanics of pulling that off, of saying, hey, open up your coffers and let's take a look to see what might be in there. I suspect it would take rounds of building some rapport and some trust with some key figures. And those people exist, and it's very possible. But anyway, it is a magical place. It's a grace-filled place, and it's a place filled with people that are there, I think, for the right reasons, trying to live life in the right way. And the argument that I make through this Athos diet, which mimics this particular practice of fasting there, which is based on Saint Epiphanios's recommendations, Saint Nicodemus's recommendations. These are also heavyweights in the faith. It is intermittent fasting. It's plant-based food, and it's just kind of staying active with walking. So,
Christspiracy. We're gonna start putting up a lot more stuff. We've been so focused on the film last year, and then going into the new year, right around January, I moved into this place and was setting up the studio to start filming. And then we got hit with the LA fires and had to leave for like almost 2 months. When I was doing the debate with Anton moderating and Wes and Aaron and all of that, I was in an Airbnb in San Diego just trying to figure out what to do. But we wound up back here, and within 2 weeks of being back and finally getting the studio set up, I had a baby. So
congratulations.
Thank you. So it's been a whirlwind, but I'm finally getting to the place because I'm the sole kind of content creator. But the point is I want to do more extended interviews and things with people that are, parallel to the topic. So if you watch Christspiracy, we can talk about that. I'll watch the Anton thing, but is the Athos diet, is it on audiobook by chance as well?
It is. It's on Audible. It is.
Well, I'll start listening to it too. That's easy for me. I listen to stuff while I'm doing baby stuff and all of that.
Yeah. I'll tell you, I mean, I think there's some value in listening to the book itself. But I'll also say that too, like the discussion I have with Anton hits all those parts and pieces, and we really riff on a lot of themes. I think it's higher yield just to listen to the podcast.
Okay. I'll do that.
It's and what's so cool about fasting, and again, it really deserves a universe of discussion, but there is a reason, and this is what I bring up. Like, there's a reason that God chose fasting as a central piece of directing us spiritually. And I try to make that argument through anatomy, through physiology, through riffs on a theme with Genesis, the Old and New Testament, and trying to make this case that when God says to fast and pray 70 plus times in the Old and New Testament, it's not by accident. And it's not just like a kumbaya thing that we feel good about ourselves. There's literally healing going on. And we ruin ourselves to our own detriment when we don't take it seriously. And then I try to link it to like the healthcare crisis in America right now, where you just can't outspend the problem. And prevention is worth, an ounce of prevention's a pound of cure. But so anyway, I would love to kind of prime the pump, maybe with me doing a little bit more research on Christspiracy. Like I said, I've listened to like 1 million hours of your stuff, but I haven't actually seen the documentary.
Watch the documentary. That's the main. That'll really get some gears turning. The documentary is much softer on like sourcing of ancient texts and everything, and some of the the minutia we've gotten into because of the debate and everything. But the documentary has a more expanded view, entertainment value, and looking at real life practical things that are going on now within like the animal farming industry. But we also too, Christ is the thread of the film, because it's the most powerful story in the film, in my opinion. But also it follows my journey, and I come from a Christian background, so that's part of the reason why it's threaded. But we also go because of our co-director Kip. He's the one actually doing the voiceover in the film because he did the previous films. He has kind of like an interest or background with. He doesn't come from any kind of Christian background. He wasn't raised that way. His parents, or his dad, was a Mormon, but left the Mormon church when he was way before he was even born. So he just grew up with no religious background. So he kind of gravitated towards, being that he grew up in San Francisco, like yoga and mysticism and these kinds of things. So in the film, we actually go to like India and Nepal and even South America, where there's this shaman that we talk to, just to see from all perspectives, is there some ethical, right, spiritual way that different traditions kill and consume animals? Like what is that? And as you'll see, it's like the through line of Christianity shows that the one that most people would assume was the most violent towards animals based on dominion and some of these things, the core and the root is actually the most animal friendly and compassionate, really, when you look at it. And we've just lost that over time. So I think you'll really enjoy it. I think you'll really enjoy the film. And then, yeah, it'll give us more to talk about. And I'm super excited to talk about this. I'm super excited about what you're doing in general. I think it's great to bring fasting into the zeitgeist, but through a spiritual lens, particularly connected to Christ, and the way that you're doing it's so great, because there's such a resurgence of like orthodoxy right now, more than I've ever seen in my life,
Yeah,
so
there is. I just want to put this out here as well. I'm sure you're aware of Jordan Peterson, maybe his second-hand man, Jonathan Pajot.
Yeah.
Those guys went to Mount Athos about a year or so ago, and they worked with my uncle and my family to get visas and to get access there. So like my uncle is a theologian from Holy Cross Greek Orthodox Seminary in Boston. He's been to Mount Athos he can't even tell me how many times he's been there. But if you really are looking for logistics and connections, we did it for Jordan Peterson and Jonathan Pajot. Certainly we can help you out. But we definitely have people on the ground. My family goes back to, we've been in Greece for 1,000 years or more. I mean, from one island. And we stay very, very well connected, and we're very sort of involved with our faith. But like I said, I think what's so interesting about your research and where I'm sort of seeing it line up is there does seem to be something very Christian and ancient about not killing animals and not focusing on blood sacrifice, and being aware that there's sort of an old paradigm shift that God was trying to do away with. Now, and again, we can do this off camera, because I know you've had a million conversations about like, well, what was Christ there for? And I'd like to ask you honestly, like, and you don't have to answer this now, or you don't have to answer in its completeness now, because I know you do a phenomenal job of responding. But I just always wanted to ask, as you're sort of bringing in sort of, it just seems to me like, yes, we arrive at this conclusion that Christ was trying to do with animal sacrifice, but like Christ still came on the earth to save men from their sins, correct? I mean, he came on the earth to destroy death. He came on the earth to fulfill the prophets in all of their fullness. I mean, it wasn't just to save animals from being sacrificed, correct? I know you're making that point, but like, would you also say that he was there for all those other things as well? I just wanted to hear you say it. I don't think I've heard you say it, but
yeah, well, no one's ever asked it quite like that. Yes, he's 100% the Messiah. I mean, I feel he fulfilled, the Messiah which Moses foretold and many of the prophets. I just think that why I talk about animal sacrifice is because I think this is the ironically least talked about aspect of his mission. Sure. We've spent thousands of years talking about Christology and the kind of ontology of the whole thing, but I think there's a very tangible aspect to his mission and his ministry that represents all of that in an act of what he did in the temple when he showed up, right around Palm Sunday and disrupted the whole thing and freed the animals. And the reason why I like to talk about it too is because, I have we all, I assume our beliefs are very similar about Jesus as Messiah, as the Son of God, these kinds of things. The reality is, though, not saying I believe this or align with this, I'm just saying there are many other religions that believe their figure is divine and God and these kind of things as well. What I feel separates, though, even more distinctly our religion from, or our person from these others, is that obviously the resurrection as well. But again, even ancient Greece had resurrection stories and dying and rising gods, these kinds of things. Again, I'm not saying they're true. I'm not saying any of that. I'm just saying it exists. These themes exist. But what I've never seen, and I've been all over the world looking for this in our documentary, I've never seen a divine figure or messianic type figure who literally went into their own religious temple and shut the whole thing down, freed the animals, and had a full frontal protest against the leaders for what they were doing. And when you really paint the picture of what actually happened, and you'll see it in Christspiracy, I mean, it's unbelievable. And particularly now knowing that the Temple Mount in Jerusalem is literally, let's call it the center of the earth if we want. I mean, it's everything in a way revolves around that piece of property. It's the most warred over piece of real estate on planet Earth. You know, and all of the Western religious faiths in some way have a tie there. And, you know, the Dome of the Rock's there, and it's the second or third holiest site in Islam. And but the, you know, the Jews have it for their ancient temple that was there, and the Wailing Wall, and they're still there, but Christians have it because of Jesus. And
the biggest landowners in Israel are Christians. I mean, it's the Jerusalem Patriarchate. I mean, it's again, it's just the funniest thing. It's like truly the history of this Orthodox Church goes back way back so far that you can get deeds of paper that show land is owned, you know, by the church. It's just the funniest thing. But
so I say all that to say, I feel that this rejection of animal sacrifice is a central part to the Reformation that was happening, that became Christianity. You know, obviously that term was more like Antioch and that sort of thing, but Jesus and what he was doing with the followers, and even John the Baptist before him, with giving baptism as almost this alternative to animals. He was giving baptism for the repentance of sins. At that time, they were doing animal sacrifice for the repentance of sins, right? But he's giving this alternative. Jesus comes as well into this movement and fully embodies the Messianic prophecy. And I think a huge part that's been minimized over time is this anti-animal sacrificial piece. And again, like you'll see in the film, and we could discuss even further, whether it's just for fasting or ascetic purposes, or there is an ethical principle behind it, I do think that there is an element.
Yeah, let me ask you this, though. You know, and again, let's talk about first order, second order, and third order effects. So I would say Christ overcoming death is a first order, you know, effect. Okay. Women sort of joining in this, becoming onto the scene, and feminism coming from that, and equality of their rights, to me that's like a third order effect. It certainly is a result of Christianity, but I wouldn't say that like Christ came on the earth to like liberate the females. It's just a natural waterfall effect of this new paradigm. So I guess and maybe you'll spend time trying to convince me otherwise, but where I kind of fall with what you're saying is almost like that third order effect. It's like, well, Christ came to forgive us of sin. He showed us a new way of living. That's maybe second order effect with X, Y, and Z involved. And then sort of there's a third order effect. What comes with the territory is, you know, equality across races, women being elevated out of poverty, and now they're more autonomous. Us having a more balanced understanding of what it means to kill and to raise and to heal. Hospitals come from that. The Western philosophy comes from all that. Like all these different things come from this center moment. I guess I would, and we don't have to answer it now, but I guess what I would like to pose to you, maybe when we talk eventually, is where do you see your Christspiracy as taking priority? Was that first order? Was that second order? Was that third order? And given that if we do accept the priority that you described, like how does a Christian then integrate that into living in the modern day? I guess what I would say is, because I trust in the oral tradition and the consistency of the Orthodox Church, which goes way back, in my mind, that is like it, like that balance and integration has already occurred. And that means, Pete, you can't eat meat and dairy for, 200 days of the year or more. You are not to allow your clergymen and your bishops and your deacons to kill animals or even witness hunting. And so anyway, I'm just throwing it out there so that when we talk, you can maybe spin on a theme here and we can riff on sort of that integration of things. But
we will, and I can do it again, but I'll go ahead and just give you a little bit there, because trust me, I've thought about this stuff for 15 years.
Yeah, I'm sure you have.
So absolutely. There's a kind of, I guess, if we want to call it a first order effect of Jesus fulfilling and overcoming sin, overcoming death, overcoming original sin, which that's one of the things I love about Orthodoxy too, way more than my Protestant faith, is some of these deeper philosophical principles that are just so well known in Orthodoxy. One of them being that there isn't this kind of original sin carryover necessarily, that one through their faith can completely overcome that. That's not something that's really taught in Protestantism. In Protestantism, it's like Adam's sin is like right there all over us all the time. There's nothing we can do about it. We're just wretched, you know. But and then too, the concept of theosis, you know, which I think is powerful. That's not taught in Protestantism either. But what I'll say is like, yeah, I mean, I think we could say like a second order or third order effect would be a language device that could help, you know, frame, especially for people in Orthodoxy that are looking to maintain their faith in their order as they've always had it, maybe apply this principle or try to understand it. Yeah, that Jesus would come, and if he's overcoming sin and death and these things, yeah, the animal sacrificial system is void automatically from that anyways. But what I will say is, what I look to when I think about like Messianic prophecy, and I think that the Nazarenes, who were the sect that Jesus kind of emerged from, whether or not he claimed himself to be a Nazarene, it seems very evident that he came from these groups, these more ascetic groups that John the Baptist was a part of and everything, the Transjordan Hebrews. And there's so many parallels that you can draw for his preaching and his teaching and how it aligns with those groups, that they were practicing these things even before Jesus for probably 200, 300, 400 years. But one of them is this opposition to animal sacrifices, full stop. And we see a parallel of it in Isaiah 11, which is, I think, my favorite personal favorite Messianic prophecy. But I think in a way, I don't want to put words in their mouth, but I think that these groups held it as their ultimate Messianic prophecy as well, because at the beginning of Isaiah 11, it says, a shoot shall come from Jesse, a branch shall come from Jesse, that'll be the branch that leads to this Messiah. Jesse being the father of, you know, King David and the line of Judah or whatever. And the metaphor of the stump of Jesse, a shoot will come. It's showing, you know, a shoot is kind of like in a plant, in tree grafting, let's say, or whatever. When you have a branch that comes off that you can literally cut and you can replant that, and it becomes a whole new plant. That's what it's saying. And so it's really this kind of idea of a branch off of this lineage of Judaism or ancient, you know, Israelite faith, that would be, it would reform and become a whole new tree. And I think that there's a lot that can be argued about Christianity, Orthodoxy, etc., that's a part of this new tree. But these so that word shoot there, or branch, should I say, is netzir, which is where the word Nazarene comes from. It's the root of the word Nazarene. And so these Nazarene, you know, ascetics were existing even before Jesus. And that's why they keep accusing him, oh, he's a Nazarene. Everybody says it's just because he's from Nazareth. Maybe the town of Nazareth is named Nazareth because Nazarenes live there. But the point is that the Nazarenes are this sect that see that Messianic prophecy. We are the branch people. We're the people that want to reform the Hebrew faith back to God's original intention. And then also in that scripture in Isaiah 11, it says that he will judge the poor as righteous. And that whole, you know, you probably saw this in our debate, in our content, but there's this idea of the poor, which is the literal poor on earth, but also the poor in spirit. And it is this ascetic idea. It's the people who live minimally and who seek God through that kind of like stripping away of all the excess and trying to find God's truth. And that's the Ebionim, or the Ebionites, or the, you know, all the various forms. So there's these two words. When you see in first century, just after, you know, Jesus passes, we have links from Jesus's brother James the Just, who led the Jerusalem church, to the Ebionim, the Ebionite movement. And the same with the Nazarenes. We have Paul being accused of being a ringleader of the sect of Nazarenes. And we have all this evidence from the early church fathers talking about the Ebionites and the Nazarenes. Now, this is the one place where I would have, you know, a divulging opinion from the church fathers. I think the church fathers are amazing. I read them almost as much as I read the Bible. They're awesome. But they saw these groups, the Ebionites and the Nazarenes, as, you know, heretical, should I say, or just not orthodox enough. Fringe. But I think that's the one place where I find myself, you know, where I will align with, like, if I were to choose a Christian faith now that I would claim, it would be Orthodox. I mean, I'm, like I said, the mother of my child is Coptic Orthodox, and we go to Orthodox church together.
Yeah, Kieran, I'm gonna ask this real quick. So, what's your wife's Coptic Orthodox? Okay, and you go to Orthodox services. You go to the Coptic church.
Yeah, we went to Epiphany Day. Recently, that was the last time we went. But yeah, I mean, everything about it is unbelievable. But I'm not plugged in where I have like my own priest, and I haven't done catechism and these kinds of things.
Were you married in the Coptic church?
No.
Okay. It's so, it's such a funny thing. I really believe in providence, and it's so funny to me that you married a Coptic Orthodox girl. I mean, I've met Coptic Orthodox girls. They are usually very ethnic and very loyal to their herd, for lack of a better word. And they're usually smart people, beautiful people. I've been to Egypt. I've been to Cairo to see what they have been how they've been persecuted over centuries. And they're just extraordinary people. But at the same time, it's like I said, it's such a funny irony to know of how close you keep Orthodoxy to some extent to you,
right?
And
yeah,
how much research you're doing, and anyway, life is long, etc. But anyway, I just find it sort of I'm laughing on the inside, and I'm hoping that. Well, anyway.
Yeah. Well, that's why I'm excited to talk to you. I want to talk to Pajot someday. I love Jonathan Pajot and everything he brings to the table. And yeah, I get such beautiful, rich, just context and connection for God in my walk in my life from Orthodoxy. But again, I find myself through my study and also just through my own contemplation, in this kind of first century Jesus movement space where I do feel something was like, I always want to go, what's the closest? And to me, sure, Orthodoxy is the closest in the quote unquote, if you want to call it like Christian boundary. Yeah. But just before that, what they would call more of a Jewish Christian or a Hebrew Christian movement, sure, are these Nazarene Ebionites. And I think there's a lot to learn from there. Unfortunately, there's no churches or anything like that I can go visit where people talk about or practice that. But
I mean, Cameron, if you want to convince 300 million Orthodox Christians that they're supposed to avoid eating meat or avoid animal sacrifice, like, you literally just need to say what we just found in this canon, which again, what's also interesting is sort of that distribution of functions, right? We have the faithful, we have clergy, which are like subdeacons and deacons and priests. We have monks, we have bishops. We always recognize in the Orthodox faith that as you move from the faithful to, let's say, clergy to even a bishop or a patriarch, like, these people are supposed to get closer and closer to what par excellence living less Christ theosis is. So if the canons say you're not even supposed to witness hunting, I just feel a case is closed. Now, I don't necessarily know if every fact you're bringing up is historically reliable, but to me, it doesn't even matter. To me, it's like, well, what is the outcome of X, Y, and Z from far long ago? Well, as you get closer to theosis and closer in leadership, you are not supposed to participate in animal sacrifice whatsoever. That is what the highest form of being a Christian is. To me, that's just case closed. Now, does that necessarily mean then that people living on Main Street can't eat meat? Like, we have to discuss that. But I give you the credit that actually, that's what the Orthodox Church is stating. You want to be closer to God. That's what you're supposed to do.
Well, even in the scripture itself, the story of Jacob and Esau, like, Jacob is seen as having favor from the Lord. And it specifically mentions in the scripture that Esau was a wild, like, hunter and kind of like brute in that way. And Jacob was a simple man or an innocent man. There's different ways that it's interpreted. That the word is kind of like a man of the tent or whatever. But
it's like Ellen Fisher. It's like the Ellen Fisher debate. It's like Esau and Jacob there. Keep going.
Right. So anyways, that's why I think a lot of it goes back to the monks and people contemplating these things, and that's probably where some of these writings come from. But I think that it's like the idea of at which here's one thing I wanted to say. So I think even in early Orthodoxy, if you look at the historical record, you even have so many variations and tensions of opinions within the Orthodox Church about the way things should be. And I think that there's a tension between asceticism and people that kind of not reject asceticism, but are like, hey, if you want to do that, and if you want to be a monk, that's your thing. But like, that's for ascetics, that's for monks. We don't do this. And I think that there's an argument with that kind of causing some loss of just like intention around the church. And you even see there's the Council of Ancyra, which we can go through when we do our full chat. But there's record in the Council of Ancyra where bishops are being forced to eat animal flesh. The ones who don't want to. They don't desire it. They don't crave it. They don't have any. It's something they avoid, and they are forced.
What century was that council?
Let's see.
Because to me, by probably 4th century, I would just imagine and I don't know this particular council you're referencing, but to me at that point, like, clergy have their roles pretty well delineated. I would have to imagine that bishops aren't eating meat. Just out of principle.
314 AD.
Okay. So before Nicaea. Okay.
Yeah, and so there's this tension where this is one of the topics at the council. We can go through the writings and stuff. I'd rather just save it for our chat if we get into it. But basically, basically, there's this idea where they're talking about, number one, Christians and early Christians being kind of killed for their faith and such, and they're going over these documents that Rome is issuing, where you can basically affirm via like a little document that you've renounced your Christian faith so that you can live. And they're talking about it. And one of the things in the document they're talking about is that the person has to sacrifice an animal to a Roman god. And they're discussing that whole thing, which is just interesting because it's like, wow, the way that they, we have this with Pliny the Younger's letter to Trajan and in a number of other places, the Albigensian Crusades. There's evidence across the board of people who are Christians and the way that they're identified as a Christian within their community and then persecuted is they say, hey, well, will you sacrifice this animal? And if they refuse, they kill them because they know that's the way they know they're a Christian. And so they're discussing it at the Council of Ancyra. And then it goes into the clergy of like, well, how much do we within our church hold this tradition? And they have this idea that, oh yeah, well, there's people that wish to not eat animal flesh. Like that's how they want to live their lives. And they say, we will allow them to do that. But the only way that we'll allow them is two things. Number one, they can't be so picky that like they can't be around people who are eating animal flesh. We won't allow that. We want them to all be able to join together. And number two, they need to at least try animal flesh in our presence once and confirm that they don't desire it. Which is just such a bizarre. So I think, and again, I don't think that's anything. I'm not speaking against Orthodoxy. I just think it's individual.
There's a tension there. I get what you're saying. Yeah. There's a tension there historically. Even today, there's a tension. What I mean by that is there's always a tension between, hey, what's for monastics, what's for the lay people, always, and the lay people are always being told up your game, become more ascetical. And the lay people are also many times saying, oh my gosh, like that's for monks. But there's this mid ground. Now, one of my goals in presenting the Athos diet and this Christian fasting paradigm is that I'm trying to let people know that in the process of them doing away with their ascetical tradition, they are literally killing themselves. Like as a physician, I'm telling them that 90% of disease can be prevented. When you do fasting correctly, your longevity increases by 40%. Like God has engineered into the physiology, this practice of fasting, a salve for suffering. Right. And what comes with that is intermittent fasting and plant-based food, whatever. But I try to hit it home that, this tension between monks and lay people is not one simply over, I don't know, like ingredient lists. It's literally over life and death. And so anyway, it's we're gonna have a good time discussing things, I guess.
And I know that it's not easy by any means.
I make the argument for the basis of fasting that in Genesis, God promises three things. work, pain, and death. And what I find interesting when I hear about Jordan Peterson having spent a lot of his career sort of researching the things that are most tough and difficult and traumatizing, like it's from reality that we gain and glean wisdom.
Yeah.
So if reality is pain, work, and death, if you're not in that space often enough, sometimes you have to be careful what insights you think you're deriving.
Right.
And so anyway, it's not a coincidence at all that most people that have been through the most difficult traumatic experiences, somewhere in that darkness is an epiphany. And so anyway, I feel sometimes the call to fasting is also a call to civilization, no matter how elite it becomes, that we create a certain basis of asceticism that's struggle. I don't believe in masochism. I believe in asceticism. And I talk about the differentiation between that. But and like I said, I think I would like to maybe, explore certainly your area of expertise from an Orthodox perspective. I won't anchor too much on terminology there, but I do think that like the questions I'll be asking as I've presented some already might be one more of integration, one more of emphasis, because to some extent I completely swallow your thesis, maybe not all the parts and pieces, but I recognize the end state, that the end state is, as we get closer to theosis and a way of life in Christ, that there's something about avoiding animal death and animal sacrifice that comes with that territory.
And that's why I was going to say one piece on that, and then we'll close out. But that's why I brought up, I didn't even get to the point. Isaiah 11. No, it's okay. But Isaiah 11, it's where the Nazarene idea comes from. Also, the highlight of it's describing the Messianic kingdom. It's describing, what God's kingdom made manifest on earth is. And it's specifically in terms of like removing predation, like the wolf will lay with the lamb, the lion will eat straw like the ox, and they will not hurt or destroy on my holy mountain. And that Hebrew word destroy is actually slaughter. So I think, like you said, that's what I was getting at this kind of secondary. Maybe it's secondary in that this is the first primary. This is the first like evidence of death being conquered and of the Messiah and God's will being made manifest on earth, is that you'll start to notice, or you'll see this non-predation attribute. So I'm with you on that. I just think that it's in the view of most Christians, and especially Protestant Christianity and American Christianity that I grew up in, like there's a complete disconnect from that idea. Like you can ask people, you ask them certain questions and they've never even thought about it before. Like if you ask them, well, do you think that we'd be killing animals in heaven, like these kind of things? And it's like, they've never even pondered the possibility. And then you show, like these
I think what you're hinting at is that there's a tradition in Christianity, unfortunately, that has completely forgotten and neglected asceticism.
Yeah.
And there is a vine or a root, a vein rather, in Christianity that still understands what that means. And then there's a consequence of that priority, which leads to, not doing X, Y, and Z. And so man, we'll have a great conversation. I look forward to it.